From the Dominion Post in Morgantown, West Virginia, this is the Postcast, the audio companion to the Dominion Post newspaper. In this episode, WVU announces preparations for the fall semester, calls to change a high school mascot, and local plans to open schools in fall get thrown for a bit of a loop. I'm your host, Chris Schultz, and these are the week's top stories. Despite surging case numbers, West Virginia University is moving forward with its plans to have in-person classes starting in just over a month. This week, new testing requirements were announced for returning students and staff, as were potential furloughs to help bridge budget gaps caused by last semester's campus shutdown. I'm joined now by Dominion Post business editor Suzanne Elliott. Suzanne, there's a lot of news that's been coming out of West Virginia University this week. You published two distinct stories about goings-on, and I want to talk to you briefly about both of them. Let's start with part of the university's plan to bring students back on campus. We learned more about the university's plan to test students and staff. Can you tell us, Suzanne, a little bit about those testing requirements for the fall semester?
Chris, everybody who is going to be on any of the WVU campuses, including Kaiser and Beckley, is required to take a COVID-19 test to see if they have the virus. And if they do have the virus, then they will be expected to quarantine or isolate themselves for 10 days to 2 weeks. The university, for example, has made room for positive students at Arnold Hall. Faculty and staffers obviously would probably, self-quarantine at home. But it's mandatory. If you don't do it and do it through WVU, students will be facing a $250 fine, and faculty could be facing disciplinary actions, including unpaid leave.
Okay, so as you mentioned there is in fact a enforcement mechanism in the way of fines. You mentioned in your article that testing will continue throughout the fall semester. Do we know at this time if that will be a continued requirement for all students and staff?
If you test positive for COVID, they obviously want to retest you to see if you still have the virus or not.
Okay, well obviously there is still a lot more to be planned out and to be answered in regards to the student and staff return to WVU in the fall. Moving on to your other story in regards to WVU and the coronavirus response, West Virginia University announced the possibility of more furloughs coming up for certain staff members. I say more furloughs because the university already has several staff on furlough right now. Suzanne, can you remind us
Correct.
about the current furlough situation?
Back in May, after the university announced that it had a $30 million shortfall stemming from having to shut down the campus in March and going to online learning, that they were facing a $30 million shortfall, they furloughed roughly 825 staff people, mostly in Morgantown, but there were some furloughs as well in Kaiser and Beckley. That move saved the university about $4 million, but they're still facing a lot of financial issues. They don't know what their enrollment's going to be quite yet. And a letter sent to faculty last week, in late June, the provost mentioned that in the annual appointment letters that the university may require faculty to take unpaid furlough days.
So this is a possibility. It's not determined yet. You mentioned that
they're hoping to avoid it, but it's raised a lot of questions, Chris, because this year's gap between the fall semester and the spring semester is 37 days. And like last year, for example, it was 32 days. There's been a lot of speculation that if they do make this move, that it could occur then in the gap between semesters.
So do we know when the university will have a better idea? You mentioned their enrollment numbers are at play here. Do we know if there's a given date that they'll know, for better or for worse, if they need to take this action?
The vice president for strategic initiatives, Rob Alsop, told me on Monday that if they do take this action, it will be in early August when they have a firmer grasp on enrollment numbers.
Okay, Suzanne. Well, obviously, as it has been for several months now, coronavirus continues to throw everything into question. Still, a lot of questions remain, and I'm sure that you will be back on the show in the coming weeks to give us the answers as they come down. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris.
It's been an intense 6 weeks since the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police sparked international protests. And while street demonstrations may have waned, conversations about racist systems and symbols still abound in every corner of the country, and West Virginia is no exception. I'm joined now by Dominion Post sports reporter Andrew Spellman. Andrew, you've been following a story pretty close to home, quite literally, for yourself for the last couple weeks, and that has to do with a renewed controversy, I'll say, around your alma mater, your high school, Ritchie County High School, and their mascot. For those that are not informed, that maybe haven't read your story or listened to your podcast, can you give us a quick background on what the mascot is and a little bit of its history?
Sure. So the Ritchie County mascot, the Ritchie County High School mascot, is the Rebel. Back in the 80s, the late 80s, I believe it was 1987, our county high schools consolidated. There was controversy surrounding the consolidation. And through a rebellion, according to some third-hand or second-hand sources on Facebook, that's how this mascot came to be the new high schools. So they put it up to a vote. I don't remember all of the other mascots, but long story short, they chose the Rebel. So at that time, I don't believe they saw, 40 years down the line that this would be controversial. However, over the course of time, the Confederate flag became synonymous with our high school and our high school mascot, which the depiction alone was a Civil War era soldier. There's arguments made that there's depictions of the soldier with a blue coat and gray pants, which signifies the Union. And there's other depictions where it's wearing a gray coat and blue pants or all gray, which signifies the Confederacy. But, when you look at the facts of the Civil War, the rebels were the Confederates. They didn't call the Union the rebels. So over time, like I said, the Confederate flag started becoming more and more synonymous with our mascot in our high school. And up until I had graduated. I graduated in 2013, but, as late as 2009, even our football team was still taking pictures in front of a Confederate flag. So the school, around the time I was a senior in 2013, up until now, have been distancing themselves from the depiction of the mascot and have begun to change things around to show a RC logo. And they've also taken proactive steps. And I commend them on this. They've taken proactive steps to ban the Confederate flag on school premises. Obviously that doesn't stop everybody. Some people are still going to wear it on their shirt. Some people are still going to have it on their car on a bumper sticker. Some people believe that this thing is truly their heritage, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But when someone does break that rule, according to, former students, they are very proactive about stopping that. And if it's at a football game, I'm pretty sure they ask those people to leave. So they are taking very proactive steps at the school. And like I said, I commend my old administrators for it because they know the controversy tied to this and they see the problems that come along with it. So that's a quick history and a quick rundown of the high school and the mascot. There's so much more, and people can see that by either listening to this past episode of the Best of Seven where I talked to the organizers of the movement who want to change this, or they can read my story, which is online right now.
So as you mentioned there, Andrew, you had a chance to speak to two fellow alumni who are kind of at the helm of this movement to remove the Rebel as Ritchie County High School's mascot. In your story, you mention that they themselves acknowledge that they recognized many years ago that they were uncomfortable with the mascot. And as you said just now, having graduated almost 7-8 years ago at this point, you also had much earlier than 2020 recognized that this mascot was an issue for the county. Why why are people pushing now to change this mascot? Why not sooner?
Yeah, I meant to ask them that, but I forgot to. I think Ryan puts it really well, and I completely agree with this. We were in our bubble when we were in Ritchie, and people who still think it's wrong are in that bubble and can't see the full picture of how this affects a black person. Ritchie County is, for the most part, white. There's not many minorities there, and when you don't have a diverse community, you don't see the problems that come along with it. So it took all three of us leaving Ritchie County and going to school in Morgantown to see from other people's points of view how this is really offensive. And I think, over the last few years, we've seen a slow burn when it comes to racial division in our country, and how we can all come together and make our country more inclusive and really break the systematic holds that we have that are against people of color. And what really has set a lot of stuff off, you see this as a news reporter yourself, was the murder of George Floyd. We've seen an explosion in protest and just outright anger about how our country treats minorities, and especially black people and other people of color. And I think these two finally had enough, and they said, this is the time. If no one does this, we're going to be the ones to do this. And they took it upon themselves and started, getting people involved, to change this. And they just released the petition this week. So I would say that's it.
So, Andrew, I know that this process is still in its early days. We're still in the petition signing process. The leaders, as you say, these gentlemen are only just now this week sitting down with the local county board and administration. But I'm curious, as a former alumnus yourself, has there been any type of replacement suggested by anyone? And if not, what kind of replacement would you like to see?
I don't think there's been any talk of a replacement. I think the mission right now is to just get the petition to its designated amount of signatures, which right now it has 343 of a 500 signature count, which I think is awesome. It's picking up steam. I think yesterday it had under 300. So it's definitely picking up steam. As for a new replacement, like I said, I don't think that's been talked about yet, at least not publicly, because the mission right now is to just get the board to recognize that this is a problem for, people outside of Ritchie County, and then possibly future generations who move to Ritchie County that might be minorities. Now, if I had to choose, I would say we should look at our history of the county. Back in the early 1900s, the oil boom was huge in Ritchie County, and that's what we became known for. We became known for our oil. A fun tidbit: the asphalt that came out of Ritchie County actually paved the roads of Washington, D.C. So, Ritchie County might be pretty small, but it has a really big impact on the early days of our country, especially during the Industrial Revolution. So I'd like to see maybe something like the Oilers come back, like the old football team. Throw an oil derrick on there as our logo. I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, something that deals with history, that isn't tied to the Confederacy. Anything at this point for me that isn't tied to the Confederacy or something that isn't inherently racist would be something that would make me happy. But if I had to choose, I would say the Oilers. I think that would be pretty cool.
Well, Andrew, as this movement potentially gains steam in Ritchie County and as it gains more attention from surrounding areas, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you. And just as a reminder, folks, you can read Andrew's article at DominionPost.com, and you can also find the last couple of episodes of Best of Seven, where Andrew discusses this with Dominion Post sports editor Sean Manning, once again at DominionPost.com. Andrew, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show today, and I'm sure we will be hearing more about the Rebels as that becomes a thing. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Last week on the Postcast, we discussed the unique challenges facing educational leaders as they try to plan for the reopening of schools in just a few short weeks for the fall semester. It was expected that many counties would be rolling out more details of their plans this week, but that was before Governor Jim Justice's press conference on Wednesday. I'm joined once again by Dominion Post reporter Jim Bissett. Jim, we had you on the show just last week to discuss the tentative plans that Monongalia County had for sending students back to school, and it seems like there has been a significant change this week at the hands of the governor. Can you tell our listeners what that change was?
Yeah, Chris, part of the ongoing saga of life in pandemic times in West Virginia and across the United States. Governor Jim Justice giving his weekly COVID-19 press briefing yesterday announced that the first day of school had been set on the books all across West Virginia, every county. The first day of school had been set for August 20th, and districts were planning accordingly for that. The governor made the announcement, though, that given the surge of cases West Virginia is experiencing, and just out of concern for safety for everybody in the buildings who are going to be going back to the buildings, he pushed that first day of school back to September 8th.
So, Jim, how does this announcement change the plans that you and I discussed last week?
Well, in the case of Mon County, the county had already had a very detailed first week of school plan set up as a staggered reentry kind of plan, an easing in process where on that first day of school you were going to have maybe, I think it was 5 grades going back to their respective schools, while the rest of the students would be doing remote learning from home as they did last spring. And then that next day you were going to have another group of grades, and you were going to carry that all through August 31st, which was a Monday, and ideally that was going to be the day where you were going to have all grades in the buildings. So in the case of the governor's announcement with September 8th, I know when I talked to Mon County School Superintendent Eddie Campbell Jr., I talked to him an hour after that announcement. So he said, "Hey, we're still processing it," because he didn't know. And he said none of his other colleagues across the state knew that the governor was going to make that announcement. But what he was saying was, he said, "Hey, I can't speak for the board, but at the same time, I can't imagine the board not wanting to go with that plan. You're just pushing it back. Okay, well, instead of August 20th, we'll just go from September 8th on." So I think that part of the plan is still the plan. And the county was also hours away from releasing at least the first installment of a comprehensive back-to-school document for the whole year, as comprehensive as one can make it in ever-changing times. And that plan, he didn't really want to release any details on that at this particular moment, but that's going to look at all those frontline particulars, all the social distancing aspects and facial coverings, that sort of thing, whether like checkpoints, for example, how you're going to get kids into the building once you get them in there, are they going to go through with temperature checks, that sort of thing. all those frontline particulars that nobody even thought about before, but now they're just going to be part of daily life, and at least September 8th forward.
So Jim, as you mentioned there, and as you discussed last week, these plans necessarily have to be flexible, but do we have a better idea now that we know that the board is going to have to make some slight adjustments in regards to this new start date? Do we have a better idea of when they might be releasing their more finalized plan?
At this point, I am not 100% sure. I think there's going to be a little pulling back on that, and I think that the pulling back part is going to hinge upon a meeting that Eddie Campbell is supposed to have with the state superintendent of schools, Clayton Birch, a Zoom meeting. Superintendent Birch is supposed to get with all 55 county superintendents in the state. He's supposed to get with them via Zoom, if not today, at some point this week, or maybe some point next week, just to say, here's where we are, here's how we did it. A lot of it is the we don't know yet factor. That's pretty much the across the board answer. Here's what we think. Here's what we have so far. Everything else we don't know yet.
Right, but one thing we do know, Jim, is that the Monongalia County Board of Education does have some new leadership. Can you tell us who is in that leadership position now?
Yeah, it's new established leadership. The board earlier this week elected Nancy Walker as its president for a 2-year term. Nancy has served in that role before. She's been on the board since 1996, so she brings a lot of institutional knowledge to the board. Ron Lytle, who had most recently been president, is going to step aside to be vice president, so he's still going to be in a leadership role too, or at least as a spokesperson role, because everybody gets a vote. But yeah, Nancy's been there. 1996, she's been in the trenches with everything from heavy meetings on textbooks to whether or not you have to close a beloved school because of declining enrollment or other factors.
So it sounds like the board is in experienced hands as they move forward trying to make these difficult decisions.
At least you do have people who have been there before, even though we're going into a place where we've never been before, in pandemic times, but you do have that. You've got that institutional knowledge on the board. You have people who don't necessarily have to be brought up to speed as far as how it works being on a county board of education in West Virginia.
Well, Jim, as we have learned between last week and this week, things change really quickly, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon as we learn more about the details of students potentially going back to school. Jim, I want to thank you for being on the show today.
Hey, well, Chris, thank you for having me, and you're exactly right. The only thing that you can count on now is that you can't count on anything.
That's all for this week's episode. The links to all the stories we discuss are also in the description of this episode on your podcasting app. If you haven't already, subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We would also really appreciate it if you would take the time to rate and review us. Nobody's exactly sure why, but a rate and a review combo really goes a long way to boost the show. Be sure to check out our sports podcast, Best of 7. Andrew and Sean are now putting out new episodes every week. You can also check out our local history podcast, All About History, an all-new episode, all about a special visit to Morgantown 100 years ago, will be out in just a few days. We want to hear from you. Do you like the show? Do you hate the sound of my voice? Is it too loud? Is it too quiet? Let me know. Email podcast@dominionpost.com, or you can reach out on any of the Dominion Post social media. We're Dominion Post WV on Twitter, Dominion Post _WV on Instagram, or go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Dominion Post WV. Tweet directly at me if you like. I'm at Schultz Reports on Twitter. That's SCHULZ. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Wash them hands.